you access to a huge archive of programs and interviews, including the Art Bell Vault, all of them classics. You can listen anytime you want, as often as you want. It's a great deal. So is George Norrie's Beyond Belief. That's George's television program, available by subscription, where George interviews great guests and covers the kind of topics similar to what he does here on the radio. With that, let's assume the position. It's scorching outside, so bring in the dog and the cat and the chicken and the pork belly. Put on a pot of joe or maybe iced tea. Slide your bod into silky summer PJs and your toes into some bunny slippers. Plop yourself down in a comfy spot, turn down the lights, and turn up the radio. In a moment, Jim Martin and his posse of summoners. I'm George Knapp, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. I don't remember the exact date, but do recall the first time I was exposed to the idea of summoning. It wasn't called that back then, but it was back in the early 90s, and there was this colorful character who called himself the Prophet Yahweh, who claimed that he could call in UFOs just by concentrating on the sky. There were several news stories about him in Southern California and even here in Southern Nevada, where he did manage to get these odd objects to appear above him and even were caught on camera for the news crews. And he reached out to me a few times because I was the UFO guy back then, and now, I guess. But each time that he reached out to me to set something up, I agreed to meet with him, but he didn't show up. So many years later, I started hearing more about organized efforts to do the same kind of thing. And it was called CE5, a much fancier name, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And there were groups that were charging people, sometimes thousands of dollars, to attend these summoning parties in the desert or out in the woods somewhere. And my general impression is that it sounded a little bit, I don't know, smarmy, I guess. And then, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the New York Times did this story in 2018, and it turned out that 3 of the people who were in this group profiled by the New York Times were people I knew or I knew of who were friends of my colleague, Jeremy Corbell, the filmmaker. For the record, Jeremy did not talk them into doing this stuff. One of the people who was in that article is Jim Martin, who is a producer of paranormal films, head of paranormal films at 1091, which is a major distributor of content to places like Netflix and Prime, all the streaming services. And in that role, Jim has had direct hands-on experience in putting together and putting out some of the biggest UFO and paranormal films of all time, titles that most of you would recognize immediately. He doesn't just follow this stuff at work, though. He jumped in with both feet. He is an avid sky watcher, and I guess we call it a summoner. He's been directly involved in trying to get the rest of the world to better understand an ability that he believes is in all of us. Jim Martin, I can't believe it, but this is your first time on Coast. Welcome.
George, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate that generous intro.
I'm looking forward to having this conversation on the air for a long time, the kind of one that you and I have had off the air. So let's get right to it. You are not a guy who leaves this stuff at the office. You walk the walk and talk the talk. How did you jump into this process, and do you call it summoning?
Well, that's true. I'm a 24/7 UFO researcher and a film distributor of the same genre, so I'm definitely immersed in the subject. I've been interested in it since I was a kid. I had a really strange missing time experience in high school, and then later on in life, I learned of these, summoning CE5 protocols and sought out some of these groups locally, which were holding this event.
So the first time, do you remember who talked to you into how to do it?
Well, I actually, the first time I heard about this was in Dr. Greer's movie Sirius, and I saw the concept of using your mind to make contact, and I'd never heard of that before, but it was actually a local legend in Los Angeles, a guy named Robert Bingham, about a decade ago, who was holding these really profound events in L.A., where, groups of 20 to 50 people would get together and phenomenal recordings were taking place. So I actually sought out Robert, and he taught me how to do this firsthand, among many others, and then we've kind of carried on these practices over the last decade and kind of splintered off into new groups.
Is he still around? Is he still doing it?
Robert is still around, of course. He's the originator of it. He works in Hollywood as a security guard, but he taught so many people how to do this, and it really spread wildly back in 2012 up to now.
How many people are out there doing this in L.A. and elsewhere?
In L.A., easily hundreds of people, maybe if not thousands. I think worldwide it is probably tens of thousands of people at this point, especially with the release of CE5, which covers this topic in a documentary.
So you helped release those films you just mentioned, and you decided to follow it up by trying it yourself. Did it work the first time you tried?
You know what? The first time I tried, I went to a public event in 2012, and I witnessed phenomenon with my own eyes in person. Then when I got back to my house later that day, I had a really great sighting of an orb that came right over my apartment, which I filmed. And that was the first experience down this very unusual road.
Were you wary at all about this because of some perceptions that it might be nonsense or sounded like a scam, like a moneymaker?
For sure, I was skeptical at first, even though when I first learned of this, I didn't even know that people were paying to go do this. I had just heard of it in the movie, and then I saw Robert, who was doing free events all over Los Angeles. I was skeptical at first, but when I showed up there at that event, I saw multiple objects performing different maneuvers in the sky that were unconventional, and I was convinced. And then later that day when I got back to my house, I really wanted to record footage at this event, but I had such a poor camera back then, I couldn't capture any of the objects. When I got back home that day, I saw a big yellow orb that came in very close and allowed me to get footage of it. And that really changed my perspective from there on.
It allowed you to get footage. You think it has consciousness, that you're actually establishing some kind of contact.
I do believe that they are intelligently controlled, and I do believe that they can connect to our consciousness. And it's very interesting because I left that event that day very frustrated that I hadn't recorded any footage, and I got home and I was vexed about it. And then I had this great sighting, and it allowed me to record it, and I studied that footage, and that kind of solidified my belief in this phenomenon.
Had you heard of Prophet Yahweh? Or by now you have, yeah.
Of course, he's one of the originators. I give him a lot of credit for going on national news and summoning an object on command. I think that took great courage, and I'm certainly well aware of him.
Let's talk about that New York Times story, how that came about, and you had to be suspicious that this was a setup, that they were going to crush you, weren't you?
For sure. We were very skeptical of the reporter, although she was super sweet, a woman named Rosette Rago, and she spent many months with us. So after I met her, our guard started to go down. She really immersed herself in our little group. She went to numerous events, a couple private hangouts, and we produced phenomenon in front of her. And so we came to trust her, although we still were very worried that when the piece came out, it would be highly critical or roast our group. But it was surprisingly a favorable article in the subculture section of the New York Times.
Yeah, it was shocking that they played it right down the middle. I suspected she must have sort of like implanted herself with your group over a period of time. But did she ever accomplish it herself? Was she just a bystander, or did she give it a go?
That's a great question. I don't know if she tried the protocols on her own, but she certainly witnessed a lot of phenomenon with us in the group, and she did take part, I would say, in these protocols of sending out a thought and then having a response from the sky. So I think the more we got to know her, the more we felt her intentions were sincere, and we were very pleased with the outcome.
At this point, how long have you been doing it, and how many times do you think it's worked, percentage-wise?
I've been recording about 12 years now. I've recorded hundreds of UFOs at this point. I'd say 40 of my recordings are really stellar, undisputable recordings, and it depends the ratio of success on really where you're doing it. If I'm at my home or my office where I see phenomenon a lot, an area or window of activity, essentially, I can have pretty good odds of generating phenomenon, at least 50% or more. It's when I go to a new territory that I typically have to ground myself and take a few weeks to achieve the same result.
So walk me through it. How does it work?
Yeah.
The first time somebody out there wants to try it, what do they do?
Well, it's very simple. It's very simple. You don't need a guru or there's no religious beliefs. You have to pay for it. You simply just go outside. You stare very intensely at one point in the sky, and you channel this profound gratitude. And you kind of harness that feeling, and you send out your thoughts to make contact, to please appear, show me the truth. And it's as simple as that. And then you pull back, you wait a few minutes, and typically the phenomenon will reveal itself.
A few minutes, meaning 10, 15, 30?
Sometimes it's as instantaneous as we'll show up at a place, and the phenomenon will show up even before we've done the protocols. Other times we'll do it, it will take 20 minutes or 30 minutes. It really depends on the energy of the group, the coherence of the group, and the location.
You don't have to have a group, though. You did it by yourself.
Yeah, all my best recordings have mostly been shot by myself, although I've had some amazing recordings with the group in Los Angeles as well.
So tell us what these things are. You just focus on the sky, you express gratitude, and you wait for something to show up, and it tends to generally work. But what are these things? Because I've seen the images. We can talk about how the audience can see it too, but I've seen your images day and night. Some of them are, just orb-like things. Some of them are pretty complicated, morphing into different shapes. Some of that nighttime stuff is spectacular. So tell us what you think they are and explain and detail some of the things that you've recorded.
Well, what they are is still a major mystery to me. Unfortunately, the longer I've recorded them, the less I know what they are. I've really kind of rounded it down to two basic types of UFOs, though, at this point. I feel that there are machine UFOs, which are likely engineered, maybe using alien hardware. I think that's more of a rare type of sighting. And then there's a second category, which I believe are biological UFOs, living creatures in our upper atmosphere, which are likely outside of our visible light spectrum. And I think the biological UFOs tend to account for the majority of the civilian sightings. And certainly I believe what I am contacting appears to be something natural, a natural force, whether of nature or of another intelligence.
So describe some of the best videos you have. There's one that's shot at night that I've seen, and it looks like a giant octopus or something dropping little baby octopi. You know which one I mean.
Yeah, it looks like it's a night recording, but it's actually a daylight recording. At 2 p.m., it was shot with infrared, so it turns the sky gray. But that was actually a sighting in Long Beach of a large, what appeared to be some kind of plasma structure, and it released about 50 smaller orbs right over my house. And it was a very, very interesting sighting. For one, the first formation that came out of this object was a triangular formation of these orbs. And that's a commonality for me. I filmed many sightings that form triangle formations, so that's kind of a visual cue for me to them that we are interacting with each other. And then beyond that, it released another 45 objects or more into the sky. And the last fascinating point is I could only see these smaller objects with my infrared camera. I could not see them with the visible eye.
So they could be up there all the time. We're just not able to see them.
I think that's correct. I just switched recording in infrared about 4 years ago, and it changed my entire perspective on filming UFOs. The first part of my career was all visible light, and that led to some exceptional findings. But once I started recording in infrared, there's just so much up in the sky that we can't see with our normal range of light that the infrared camera reveals. And I'm not the first one to do this. You look at all the government recordings, they're all in infrared. But beyond that, even in the 50s and 60s, you had Trevor Constable, who really pioneered this work of capturing amoeba-type creatures in the infrared spectrum. So it's long been practiced.
You must see things. I've seen some of the videos that look like, and I've seen these things myself in videos shot here in Las Vegas of things that move around. They look like maybe they're big plastic bags or something because they're morphing and changing shapes and moving kind of with the wind. Could be plastic bags, could be balloons, weather balloons, something like that. I take it that you and your group try to be skeptical about these things.
Certainly, super skeptical. We try and use as much discernment as possible. I've been doing this for a while, analyzing footage, at least in my little career, 10 years recording them, and I tend to try and present the recordings that I think speak for themselves. But certainly a lot of these sightings can be attributed to conventional objects, weather balloons, birds, etc.
We're going to bring on two guys who were friends of yours, but were highly skeptical, gave you a lot of grief about this, but you turned them around. You challenged them to come out and give it a try, and it changed their views. We'll bring them on in the top of the hour. Might open up the phone lines with some questions from our audience for you before we bring those guys on. And Cosmically Conscious is what we're talking about tonight with Jim Martin, discussing summoning, the process of summoning, how people can use their consciousness to sort of call in whatever these things are. Jim suspects maybe they're a life form, which you think if people might freak out about space aliens or whatever UFOs are visiting us, flying around in our skies, when they hear about these giant blobs that are living forms in our skies that are not birds, I'm concerned about how people are going to react. We're going to get back to the conversation with Jim. We'll take a couple of your calls, then we'll bring on his friends Mike and Alpha at the top of the hour to dive a little bit deeper into summoning and how it works here on Coast to Coast AM. So, Jim Martin, tell me more about the consciousness aspects of this. You think that by focusing human consciousness, you can communicate with something that's floating around up there, possibly some sort of a biological life form that presumably lives here. It's not from somewhere else. You think it might be from here.
That's correct, I do, and that's not too far from what the great Robert Bigelow said on 60 Minutes, in that, they asked him, where are these UFOs? Do you have to go into space? And he said, no, they're all around us. And I think that rings true with the same observations that we see. They come whenever we throw these groups. Once you make contact once, you tend to have a lot of sightings after that, and you can't undo it. So I believe there is certainly a conscious connection to whatever this intelligence is. But I've kind of let go of defining what it is at this point, because it is so complicated. And I just focus now on the observations, trying to further my own communication with these anomalies and try to capture something on film that I can share with others.
Is there further communication? Are you able to make requests, for example? Hey, can you split in two? Why don't you float down here, get closer, or do something that would surprise us? Anything like that?
That's a great question, George, and that's definitely at the root of some of my best sightings. They've been very specific requests that I've made that have been actualized in the sky, and I've recorded them, and those are my strongest case studies. And I'll give you one right now. In May 2012, there was an amazing triangle formation of orbs over MacArthur Park in downtown Los Angeles, captured at one of these events. Once I saw this recording, I was not at this event. I just simply saw this recording, and I was so stunned by it that this triangle formation was right over downtown L.A. I then went back to my little quarters, and for weeks on end, I concentrated my intention, and I said, I sent my thoughts to the sky, and I said, please bring me a triangle formation of similar caliber. And after 2 months of doing that, I woke up one morning on January 4th, went outside, and sure enough, right on above my apartment in Newport Beach was a perfect triangle formation of these yellow orbs. And to me, that was vindication. They were picking up my thoughts and then showing me a visual display in the sky to confirm that we are interacting with each other. And that's just one of many examples.
Is it there for you? I mean, you're talking about a big triangle over an L.A. park. Are other people in the area able to see it, or is it there sort of for you to see it or your group to see it?
Well, anyone that's in the park, which is hundreds of people on any given weekend, will see these objects if they just look up. It's as simple as that. And at many of these events, they're packed with people at these parks, and a lot of bystanders tend to come up to us and also witness these events. Some of the events have had up to 150 people at once. The police have shown up. The police have seen them, even themselves. So I think you just really have to be looking for them to catch it.
I know that I mentioned the New York Times story. Is there other media coverage of this? Is it taken seriously, or do you get the same kind of grief that UFO witnesses, regular spaceship? Yeah. That's
a good question. Well, the one thing I have that has worked towards my favor is strong video footage. So I tend to let the video speak for themselves. I've had a number of these recordings featured on network cable. Paranormal Caught on Camera featured that recording you just described with all the objects being shot out of the mother orb. And a bunch of my other recordings have been featured in shows and television networks. But I think this concept of using your mind to make contact is very new to mainstream society, and it's going to take some time to resonate with them.
I mean, it's profound. If this is real and everyone can do it, wow, that's pretty profound. I'm sure you've thought it through, or further than I have.
Well, it is profound, but I think that ties back to the nature of all the psi phenomenon: remote viewing, physical mediumship, clairvoyance, UFO summoning. I think it all comes back to the same aspect of utilizing your consciousness to have these experiences. And I just think that we have yet to truly understand the power of our own minds and the effect it has on our physical reality. We're just touching that, at least from a civilian perspective, from my little perspective.
Any downside to this? Anything that creeps you out or follows you around, or side effects?
Well, I think that's a great question, too. Once you open the store, you really have to be ready for it. Once you witness this phenomenon, it tends to escalate. And if you record the phenomenon, it tends to escalate even more. And I talked to Jeremy about this a few days ago, about how it seems the phenomenon wants to have an audience to perform to. And again, the more you record them, the better the performances get. So that's an interesting aspect. Another thing I want to mention on the hitchhiker comment is that, yes, it does follow you wherever you go if you continue to engage it. So, for instance, I filmed a UFO in California that I call a double-staged orb. That's two globular objects slapped together performing these incredible maneuvers. I then went all the way across the country to Rochester, New York, a year later, spent the summer at my mother's house, and after about a month of really grounding my energy and sending up my protocols, I had the same UFO sighting in New York, which I captured on film. So there is this kind of aspect of a hitchhiker quality, and the phenomenon does tend to follow you wherever you go.
But doesn't creep you out.
Initially, it did. I think when I started to see the frequency of sightings in the early 2010s, I got a little bit worried at first. But once I got past the fear and I embraced it is when a lot of the bigger discoveries and bigger breakthroughs came. So I embrace it. That is just my personality and my desire to learn more.
I want to include our audience in this discussion, both for you, and then when Mike and Alpha are brought on, we'll take some calls there in the latter part of their visit with us, too. But let's get a couple of comments from our listeners on the wildcard line. Walter in Washington. Hi, Walter. You're on with Jim Martin.
Hello. Yeah, I've been doing this for a long time, taking videos of the same type of phenomenon. And but I believe that they're a product of me, my own self, my body. And I believe they protect my house, everything I do, and also I've got a lot of videos of them. I don't see the biological kind of fish thing that he sees, but mine are lights, and they follow me wherever I go. I'm not creeped out about them. In fact, I believe it's something divine. I think there's a purpose for me here, and they're guiding me the way. And as far as I can see, it's going to be something like on the level of angelic, except that it's a product of my own body. And I believe each person, when we all evolve to this next evolution, that's where we'll be. I mean, it'll be like the saints and whatnot, just another evolution. And it doesn't go away, and they're here to stay, and my videos will be out soon, and that's the way it is.
Well, thanks, Walter. Jim, want to comment?
Well, that's fascinating, Walter, and I'm really happy to hear that you've had these amazing experiences, and I think you make a really great point. Is this a projection of our own consciousness? Are these entities, are they coming from within us and manifesting in this reality? I think that's a big question, and I've resonated with that explanation many times myself. And I think it's our tendency as humans to personalize these experiences because they are very personal, and they feel very related to our consciousness. So I support you, Walter, full force. I can't wait to see your recording.
Thanks, Walter. We're going to Chance in San Antonio. Hi, Chance. You're on with Jim Martin.
Hey, guys. Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. You definitely would embrace, more likely to, if this stuff has actually happened to you. Now, I imagine there are people out there that are not telling the truth, but there are some of us out here who are, and who have seen some very strange things. And so, anyway, I heard you guys talking about the orb thing. I have witnessed that. I refer to them as pulsating orbs of light. They pulsated from within these things. They were white. They were in a cluster. I studied them, as best I could from the ground. They were only above the telephone lines, or the poles, maybe about 8 to 9 foot above those. So not very high at all. Those were very strange because each one of them had 3 pulsations from within them. So those were just above me. At 17 years old, I did was what I now consider to be a contact type of event. It was an amazing sight, no sound, all that. The elongated diamond-shaped object is there. Of course, I didn't know how to share it with many people and didn't for a long time. And I had good reason to be afraid of what they might think. But just to let you guys know, for other people's comfort, I was asked to have myself checked out by professionals just to make sure, right? And just to let you guys know, the professionals loved me. They thought I could be one of them. So anyhow, just in case you're wondering, no, I'm not a schizophrenic or anything like that. I had a close encounter at 17, and then some 25 years later, I was in what seemed to be like a telepathic message, okay, and I had no control over it. It took me, not anywhere, but in my mind, and seemed like a wormhole traveling through, and then I was met by the same object that I saw at 17, but this time it talked to me. A voice spoke to me. And the first thing I remember was I'm coming closer to this object. I'm, of course, stunned. I can recognize seconds or moments into the experience. Wait a minute, I've seen this thing before. And then it told me, don't be afraid, and then it talked to me about the planet. And
I'll tell you what, Chance. I think you called in before and shared some of this story with us. Can I get Jim in here and get him to comment on what you've told us so far? Jim?
Yeah, well, that sounds like incredible